Dennis Gates has nabbed his first player in the transfer portal, and it seems to me that Jacob Cruz fits the Dennis Gates model, both for better and for worse. So let's talk about it coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. And it does seem like Vegas is souring just a tiny bit on the 2024 Missouri Tigers. And speaking of the future, Missouri's biggest target in high school at the quarterback position has set his unofficial visit to Columbia. But you know what? I do want to start today's show off by talking about hoops, because Dennis Gates has gotten his first player in the transfer portal. And I'd say this is a great get, certainly a great start for Dennis Gates and his club. Jacob Cruz played his last season at Tennessee Martin. No doubt his breakout season in college basketball, at least at the Division I level. He played a little bit of junior college basketball, played 2 years at North Florida as well, though the previous season it appeared that he got injured after about the first 7 games or so. Cruz then missed the last, I would say, 20 games or so of the previous season for North Florida. So he transfers last season to Tennessee Martin. And just to give you an idea of the kind of player, the kind of market that this player had, he received interest reportedly from Kansas, Kansas State, Gonzaga, UCLA, Arkansas, Illinois, Oklahoma, and of course Mizzou as well. And according to everybody who writes about the transfer portal out there, at least so far, Jacob Cruz, one of the absolute top targets in the portal, and to secure his services this quickly, I think that's a really big win for Dennis Gates, one he needed, quite honestly. Hell, after this season, I needed a victory for the Missouri basketball team. And again, this was definitely this previous season, by far and away, was Jacob Cruz' breakout as a college basketball player. Didn't do much, once again, as an Osprey down in North Florida. What type of game does Jacob Cruz have? Well, let me tell you, he's a big man, probably 6'8", 6'9", about 210 pounds, a 41% three-point shooter last season, even better in conference play. So he actually got better with that shot as the season goes along. I'd say he fits the Dennis Gates mold quite perfectly offensively. And he does also do something that Missouri needs desperately well, which is defensive rebounding. Also, most of his three-pointers, just breaking down his game a little bit with the little bit I could here this afternoon, most of his threes came from above the break, as it's called. In other words, at the top of the key, on the wings, not in the corner. So that tells you something there in terms of where he can play. That's a good thing. He's going to be a pick and pop type player, and a guy who's going to score on a lot of dribble handoffs, as well, as you saw Missouri do a lot with Kobe Brown last season. Not quite as effectively, obviously, with lesser forwards this year, but he was an elite scorer last season at Tennessee Martin off of those dribble handoffs. Also an above average scorer in the post as well. And this guy absolutely is a scorer, and he's a really good one. Plus, as an 81% foul shooter, that tells me that all that shooting is sustainable. He's a guy who's got plenty of range, too. He's shooting those three-pointers sometimes from 3 to 4 feet behind the line. So again, this is the type of guy that Dennis Gates likes to have, a 6'8", multi-dimensional scoring type player. Not much of a facilitator, though. He's not going to be a Kobe Brown type passer. At least I don't anticipate that. He wasn't that at Tennessee Martin anyway. Let's put it that way. We'll see what he looks like as a Missouri Tiger. Now, my biggest concern to me, at least statistically, you look at Jacob Cruz on paper, and it's a 1.2% block rate, which at 6'8" is rather low. It's basically what Caleb Grill's block rate was last season. In fact, Anthony Robinson, for example, had double that block rate at 2.4%. Just to give you some more context, Jordan Butler, Connor Vanover, and Aiden Shaw were all over 8% in terms of block rate. So does it necessarily matter if Jacob Cruz is literally blocking shots next season? Well, I would say yes and no, because I would say that's a concerning number against especially Ohio Valley competition, that he's not blocking more shots than that. But nobody ever accused Dennis Gates of prioritizing defense, have they? So that is a real concern to me. I will say that Cruz is not a statue whatsoever. He can definitely move side to side, just not a particularly an above the rim type of player, though. So who's he going to guard? Is he going to be picked on defensively? Maybe like Noah Carter was at times. Again, Carter with a much higher block percentage rate than Cruz had last season. So again, blocking shots is not everything. It does give you a little bit of an indication of an athletic ceiling there. So, excuse me, hopefully Cruz can be an average defensive player, because if he can, there's no doubt he's a really good addition, because you just watch his film. He's a knockdown shooter and a really efficient scorer, and that's something, as much as I've complained about Missouri's defense here last season, no doubt that Missouri did not have enough scorers, not enough shooting on the roster either, and obviously not enough rebounding. So at least 2 out of 3 ain't bad there for Jacob Cruz. So to me, this is an excellent start for Dennis Gates and his portal class for this offseason. Couldn't really be much better than I could imagine. Good a start as you could imagine is what I'm trying to say. And by the way, one more quick basketball note here. Jesus Carolero Martin has taken the Mizzou Hoops, the at Mizzou Hoops, out of his Instagram biography, his Instagram bio. So take that for what it's worth. But when it comes to Mizzou football, I saw something interesting today over at my friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, and it seems like Vegas, as it were, the bettors, the betting public, it seems like they kind of hate Mizzou right now. Now, hate is, of course, a relative thing, but last I checked, the number was 10 in terms of an over-under for Mizzou. Well, it's now down to 9.5, and not only that, the under is the heavy VIG side at -176. So in other words, it seems like the money is on Missouri to win fewer than 9.5 games next season. And I have to say, I am mildly insulted by this. If you look at Missouri on paper, they've got as much returning production offensively as anybody in the country off what was a really good offense last season. By the way, sure, there's some returning production defensively that they need to replace, but hey, everybody has some question marks, and I think really Missouri supplemented pretty well in the transfer portal so far, it would seem. And by the way, those first 4 games for Missouri, Tigers going to be heavy favorites there, and realistically, Missouri's going to be an underdog as we sit here today in 2, perhaps 3 games, really realistically just 2 games, at Texas A&M, at Alabama. Even I wouldn't guarantee that at A&M is going to be a Missouri underdog situation by the time we get there on October 5th. So I'm really trying to figure out what exactly FanDuel Sportsbook is trying to tell me here. Is it the Sharps? Are they on something? I'm just not really sure, because all the advanced stats, everything said Missouri was just about what we thought they were last season. A borderline right there, sort of top 10 kind of team, and I think they'll be right there again with a fairly favorable schedule. I would definitely favor the over 9.5 right now, especially if they're giving me +142. I think that's a pretty favorable bet right now over at FanDuel Sportsbook if you're a Missouri fan or somebody who just likes value and money. And on the football side of things, high school recruiting seems to be progressing rather well, as Missouri is hosting officially just a boatload of 4-star players coming up, and that doesn't even include an unofficial visit from 4-star quarterback Matt Zollers. So let's talk a little bit more about recruiting here coming up in just a second. But first, I want to tell you about our newest sponsor, and it is Better Together. And let's be real, pretty soon most of our brackets are going to be busted here in just a few days. Well, if you're tired of the same old daily fantasy grind, where you basically just make a roster, cross your fingers, and hope for luck, well, here's the thing. I'm introducing Better Together, the first cooperative daily fantasy platform where teamwork triumphs talent, and you can play with your friends and not against them. See, that's the beauty of this. It's not just you sitting in a darkened room by yourself. Let's create a shared experience and have some real fun with this. And in the past, I'll be honest, I've always found the best value when I team up with some of my smartest friends. You know what? I'm going to encourage Missouri fans to show they're the best players by participating in the Fan Challenge series for a chance to win real money prizes. Download Better Together now from the App Store and sign in using promo code Locked On for a chance to win your share of over $1,000 in cash prizes. Remember the code Locked On, because winning alone is fun, but it's better together. And passion, drive, and patience, what brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With more than 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that victory. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit. Only available to U.S. customers. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN all day? Have to turn down the volume to cancel out all the shouting? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming, quite honestly. And Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And one thing I'm never going to get tired of, I could talk every single day about Missouri bringing in a whole boatload of 4- and 5-star players in for official visits. In fact, Missouri, as of today, from May until June, has 15 4-star players and 1 5-star player lined up for an official visit. That 5-star player is Michael Fasusi, a offensive lineman out of the Dallas area that I've talked about quite a bit on this show, including with our Locked On recruiting expert Brian Smith, and lots of 4-star players we've talked about here too, including Isaiah Mosey, Dylan Alfred, Jack Lang, all kinds of guys. And maybe the most interesting name that's popped up here recently is Lamont Rogers, another highly rated offensive lineman. Some people have him leaning toward the Tigers. In fact, Parker Toon, he's a guy, has drawn the ire of some Missouri fans on the Oklahoma beat over the last few months or so, but I believe Parker Toon has a future cast in for Lamont Rogers. So if that actually were to happen, big deal for the Tigers. Frankly, just the level of offensive linemen that Missouri is in on right now is just really, really encouraging and impressive. I think there's a lot of things we can give credit for that. Obviously, Missouri's doing is very competitive for sure in terms of name, image, and likeness payments and deals with a lot of people across the country. But I got to give a lot of credit to Brandon Jones as well. I think he showed a lot of people last season that he's a heck of an offensive line coach. And by the way, as I mentioned earlier, all these four-star players, these are all just the official visitors. There's also going to be hopefully Matt Zollers will eventually be an official visitor, because if he is, that means he's a Missouri Tiger. He's going to be taking 4 unofficial visits here over the next few weeks, including one to Missouri as well as Pittsburgh, Penn State, and Georgia. Missouri set to kick off his unofficial visits on Wednesday, March 20th. So that's actually tomorrow. So tomorrow, actually, Matt Zollers apparently going to be in Columbia. So hopefully some nice weather. Hopefully he has a good old time here in mid-Missouri. So anyway, that's going to be something to watch, because it seems like over the next 2 or 3 weeks or so, Zollers will be making that official decision. And another interesting name with Missouri ties has entered the transfer portal. Tarris Reed Jr., who played his last 2 years, his freshman and sophomore seasons at the University of Michigan. He's a former top 50 type caliber high school recruit out of St. Louis. And so far, I don't know that he's completely lived up to that billing yet as a Wolverine. He's put his name into the portal, but obviously he's a name to monitor here. You've got to think Missouri has at the very least reached out to this young man already, 6'10", 265 pounds. No doubt he's a good rebounder and a good shot blocker, but his offensive game could definitely use some polish, to the point where I wonder if he's a good fit, if he would potentially be a good fit for Dennis Gates and the type of basketball that he likes to play or not. Only a 58% free throw shooter and only 52% on his twos as well, without any outside game to speak of. Just doesn't really sound like the kind of Dennis Gates player we've come to expect 2 years into his career here at Missouri. Obviously, Missouri could use some rebounding and some shot blocking, but what's the trade-off here? For what? To have a guy who's maybe a bit of a non-scorer? I don't know. Maybe that's too harsh. Maybe those of you who've watched Michigan more closely than I have the last couple years will have a more positive assessment of Reed Jr.'s game, but that would be my concerns. If I'm Dennis Gates, that's what I'm asking myself right now in terms of evaluating Tarris, or is it Tarris or Tarris? Tarris Reed Jr. And by the way, speaking of the portal, you do have to love the language that the NCAA puts out when they do any type of rule update. For instance, just this past week or so, the NCAA issued Division I bylaw 14.5.5.1 preliminary injunction application FAQ. And you just have to wade through all of this sort of weird legalese here to then eventually figure out that, basically what they're saying is that multi-time transfers, guys who have transferred to multiple schools, who transfer during or after the current academic year, can be eligible to play at their new school without a waiver. So in other words, this whole free-for-all transfer whenever you want thing, it's basically being upheld over and over and over again. It doesn't seem like it's going anywhere anytime soon. So if you want to go somewhere, it doesn't really seem like there's much of anything stopping you. That would have been the simple way of saying that, but instead they gave us NCAA Division I bylaw 14.5.5.1 preliminary injunction. So good. This is why I get the big bucks, people. Not because I'm as wildly entertaining as you can possibly imagine. No, it's because I got to read through this kind of stuff. That's why I get paid. And speaking of getting paid, obviously the NCAA and all of its broadcast partners, well, they want to get paid by its big sacred cow, March Madness. That's really the cash cow at this point for the NCAA. Remember, it does not control the college football playoff, but it does still control the NCAA basketball tournaments. So obviously, how do you get more revenue out of a sport that doesn't really seem to be growing its audience nationally? Well, hey, expand the tournament. Let's have even more property on television. But I got to say, this season shows an exact example. This very season, the selection process and the teams that were just left out shows exactly why this is a bad idea. So I'm going to tell you why that is coming up here in just a little bit. But speaking of getting paid, let's get paid right now. And I'm going to tell you about Nissan, because this week's March Madness bracket highlight is brought to you by our friends at Nissan. Each week, we're picking one team that stands out, a team that's pushed it further than the rest. And just like any of the all-new 2024 Nissan SUVs, these guys were able to take it to the next level. And the Auburn Tigers, well, they can only be described as a Pathfinder. They've been thrilling to watch and have created a lane for themselves after claiming the top spot in the SEC. As they knocked off the Florida Gators in the SEC Tournament Championship, they're set to make a big run in the NCAA tournament. So take the Nissan Rogue, Nissan Pathfinder, or Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. As I'm about to argue again against the expansion of the NCAA tournament, I am reminded of a simpler time, a better time, just a few months ago, when the only real complaint I had about Dennis Gates is that he was pushing to expand the NCAA tournament. The halcyon days. But we have to live in reality, and in this reality, it sure seems like a lot of people, including Dennis Gates, are pushing to expand the tournament, and it almost feels inevitable. But you know what? This podcaster is going to do everything he can to make sure this doesn't happen. So how about some context, right? Context is king. I really believe that. And while the Ken Pom rankings, I know I refer to them a lot here on the podcast, and no doubt that they aren't everything. They aren't the gospel whatsoever. But this is a pretty good indication of what kind of field you have. If you think about the field right now, there are 8, 15, or 16 seeds in the tournament that are rated below Missouri in the Ken Pom rankings. Again, below 0-19 in the SEC for Missouri. So that in and of itself is not a great argument for expanding the tournament. Now, if you did expand the tournament, say, as some people have suggested, to 80 teams, and that's probably about as small of an expansion as you're going to see, well, that's 12 more teams, obviously. And by Ken Pom, let's see who the next 12 rated teams that were left out of the field. Well, they are the following: St. John's, Wake Forest, Villanova, Cincinnati, Oklahoma, Indiana State, Ohio State, Utah, Iowa, Providence, Xavier, and Virginia Tech. Now, all 12 of those teams, except for one, have something in common. They're all major conference, high major teams. Only Indiana State is the mid-major sort of Cinderella team that would have received an at-large bid under this scenario. Now, I understand they're not just going to go, hey, let's go with the 12 from Ken Pom. I understand it's a little bit more nuanced than that. But again, that gives you an idea of the type of teams that were complaining about not getting into the tournament, that felt like they got the shaft. Well, really, those were the teams with probably the biggest argument. Most of them, again, just some fairly mediocre high major teams. Let's just be honest with that. Is that moving the needle for any of you? To me, I like to keep the NCAA tournament being meaningful. And to me, once if you go to 80 teams, that extra 12 teams, what have we really done there, in my opinion? We've definitely made more of a product, but more is not always necessarily better. The NCAA tournament is already just a smorgasbord of basketball for especially the first 4 days of the tournament. I mean, it's already an all-you-can-eat buffet. At an all-you-can-eat buffet, nobody has ever said, you know what, I could use more food. Maybe you could use higher quality food, but you're already filled up on basketball in those first 4 days and in these 3 weeks in general. So again, not saying that's exactly how it's going to play out, but as much as I would love to see Indiana State and Robbie Avila in the tournament, is that really worth it just to get that one guy in there? In my opinion, I just don't think it is. If anything, hey, maybe lessen the teams from those high major conferences. They're never going to do that, though. That's the problem. So to me, I think what we have right now is pretty good. In my perfect world, it would still be a 64-team tournament. But you know what? I can live with the 68. I can live with the play-in games, the opening rounds, whatever you want to call them. I can live with it. But to me, you go any further than this, and you really start to run a risk of actually devaluing in a serious way what has been one of the staples of American sports for my entire life. So I'm curious to hear what your all's opinion is on that. Maybe you are just such a college hoops junkie. You want more of it. If so, that's a totally valid opinion. I just think that most people are not of that opinion. And if you really want to make this sport grow, you do have to appeal to the masses. That's the one thing I will say. So again, tell me what you think at Locked On Mizzou, Twitter, X, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, the whole deal. Check me out any of those places. And as always, thanks for telling a true son or daughter about this show, LockedOnMizzou.com, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you get podcasts. So until next time, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.